Hello everyone, welcome back to ID116 3D Animation 1. In this lecture I will be discussing the basics of animation in Blender. So let's go ahead and get started. Here I am in a new scene. First things first, of course, I'm going to delete all of my default objects, Shift A, plane, and then we will go ahead and scale that up. That's going to act like the ground. Shift A again. And I'm going to select cube. Let's go ahead and press G, Z, and Control so that we can bring it up and it will sit right up on top of our plane. And the last thing we do before we get into the animation is we're going to just reposition this along the Y-axis. All right. So when we animate, what we're talking about is creating change over time. We're going to change the properties of an object, and we're going to do that over a set amount of time. We will set the major beats of the animation, or keyframes, and then Blender is going to interpolate the rest of it for us. So there are two ways that we can create keyframes. I'm going to show you the manual way, and then I will show you the auto key way. So the manual way is you have everything set up the way you want it, and we're going to press G, and then I'm just going to hit enter and say I, and now we can select, I is for insert keyframe. So now we can select what we want to record. For my class, primarily you are going to use these first 6. I'm going to be working with location and rotation, so that's going to save the location data for the object as well as the rotation data for it. When I do that now, it creates a keyframe down here on my timeline. It's a little diamond-shaped object. If it is unselected, it'll be gray. If it's selected, it will be gold. If I go back up to my 3D viewport, press N to open my sidebar, we'll see that, we'll go back to frame 0 real quick. In frame 1, these values have changed from gray to kind of a gold, same color as my keyframe. That tells me there is a keyframe on that particular property. Now if I scrub my playhead out, we'll see that those backgrounds have changed from gold to green. What that is telling me is that there's an animation on that particular property, even though at the moment there is no change. There's still an animation because I've created a keyframe for it. So I'm going to come down to frame 20, and at frame 20, I want to duplicate this keyframe. I want my object to sit there for 20 frames before it does anything. In fact, let's go ahead and make it 24 frames so it'll sit there for 1 second. Now the easiest way to do that is make sure that you have that frame selected, that keyframe selected. Press Shift D and drag down to where you want it to be. Now we'll see that we have a keyframe at both 1 and 24, and we have a solid line between the two of them. That tells me there's no change between those two keyframes. At about frame, we'll say 34, he is going to finish turning, so we're going to make him look both ways before he jumps. So I set my playhead at 34. I press R for rotate, Z for the Z axis, and then I rotate. I press I to insert the keyframe and say location rotation. Again, I want to hold that particular movement for, I don't know, we'll say 10 frames, maybe 5 frames this time. So Shift D, and I'm going to drag it down to about 44. All right, so that's going to hold that for 10 frames. At the end of that 10 frames, he's going to turn the other way. So we'll go to 44 there. R for rotate, Z, and I'm just going to rotate it back around. And now I have to hit I to insert location rotation keyframe. So he looks, and then he's going to look the other way, and we're going to make that take a little longer. So I'm going to highlight that keyframe. Now I can press G, and I can just drag it down the timeline. So that one's going to take a little bit longer to complete. We'll go ahead and go to 70. That might be a bit too long, but that's okay. I'm going to hit spacebar to test my animation. It actually looks real good. All right, so again, I want to hold this particular pose for about 10 frames. Shift D to copy that frame, and I'm just going to drag it down and place it. After that, I want it to turn back and face forward. So in this case, I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to hit 0. And now I'm going to press I to put in location, rotation keyframes. So that's the first bit. That's how we manually create keyframes. The nice thing about manually creating your keyframes is that you get to select what it records. For the next part, we're going to make him jump. He's going to do a little jump. We're going to use what is called auto key for this process. Auto key is going to eliminate the need for us to press the I key, because when I turn it on, it's going to record everything I do. So we'll just go ahead as far as moving the object. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on auto key. It's right here. It turns blue when it's on. I want to go ahead and begin my jump. So we're going to have that jump take about 15 frames. To move him this time, I'm going to look at it from a side view, orthographic, and that way I don't have to worry about moving it on the x-axis. I will only be able to move it on the y and the z-axis. So I'm going to grab it, we're going to bring it up to about right here. And I also want it to rotate, so rotate, and then we'll say X, and I'm just going to rotate it. If I hold Control, it will snap for me, so I can do it exactly 45. Now I haven't pressed I, and it went ahead and recorded it for me. So that's pretty good. Okay, now we're going to go out here to where it's 105, so let's go to 120. This time I'm going to come up to the rotation, and we're just going to set that to be, actually I'll just do it manually. If I wanted to, I could have punched in -90, but rotating it works too. So now I'm going to press G, and I'm going to bring it down. And remember, I have auto key on, so it's remembering all this stuff. All right. Now, if I were to play this, go ahead and turn that off real quick, hit play. We can see that we're starting to get a little bit of animation going there. That's good. One thing I would like to add is just a little bit of slide there at the end, so it slides when it hits the ground. So I'm going to go to about frame 30, G, Y, and I'm just going to drag it down a little bit. And I have turned off auto key, so if I want to record this, I got to make sure I press I. If I don't record it, if I don't press I, this is what happens. It goes back to where it was in the previous keyframe. So before I do that this time, I'm going to go ahead and just turn on my auto key, G, Y, and then we'll have it slide into place. Turn that auto key back off, and let's play that and see how that looks. Okay. Now, while the actual jump itself could use a little work, overall I'm pretty happy with the block out, and that's about where I'm at this stage, is a block out. Now I could continue to add animations on down the timeline. One thing I do want you to take note of is that your keyframes are object dependent, meaning if I select something else, all of my keyframes are going to disappear because the keyframes are tied to this particular object. All right, so that's the basics of how to create keyframes and kind of how to manipulate them. You can highlight them, you can delete them, you can drag them around as you need to. This is the main focus of what I want you to understand today. I want you to understand how to create a keyframe and how we build our animations a little bit at a time. Now, the extra part of this, we're going to talk about something that's kind of an advanced feature. This is going to be called the curve editor. The curve editor is going to allow me to really have a lot of control over my animations. So to show you that, I'm going to make my timeline a little bigger. If I click on the type of editor that it is, and I go over to animation, we'll see that I have one called the graph editor, and that's the two that we're going to work with, timeline and graph editor. So when I switch to the graph editor, what I'm looking at here is a visual representation of my animations. What I did there was I pressed the A key to select everything. I press A, select everything. And then I pressed the period key, which zooms in on the selected objects. Now let's take a look at this, because we saw this earlier in our timeline, and I want to make sure you understand a little bit of this. So this is the object, cube. When I expand it out, we see that we have cube action. Okay, that's anytime I've translated or scaled or rotated the object, it's going to be under the cube action. And then I have the object transforms. So I want to expand that now. If you see, when I expand that, you will see that I have individual tracks for each of these. So if I turn on the X location, we can see that there's a keyframe all along there, but it never moves on the X, does it? There's no change. So let's look at the Y location. Now we see some change, don't we? So from left to right across the top here are my frames. From going up and down on the left-hand side here is the value. So we start off at a value of -10, and for the first several keyframes, till about 90, we stay there. It rotates, and now it's starting to move. Okay, sorry about that. Had somebody knock on my door. So now we can start to see how it's moving on the y-axis. If we were to come in and look at the z, then we will see the same thing. Now to move around and to navigate this viewport's not exactly the easiest thing in the world, but if you press Control and your middle mouse button and you push to the left, you're going to tighten things up. If you push to the right, you're going to spread things out. Push up, you will spread things out. If you push down, then you will tighten things up. One thing that I like to do is just hit A to select all, and then hit that period key, and that's going to zoom in very nice. So as we can see now, we can see the actual jump. Each one of these little dots is a keyframe at which I can now manipulate. So if I wanted to, I could grab this and I could drag it over to here, or I could drag it up and make it go up higher. There are lots of different things I could do. Now, in each one of these keyframes, they have these handles. If I right click, I get the option for like changing the handle type. So I can make them, right now they are probably aligned. So that means if I turn one, it's going to turn the other. Okay. And that's going to change how it interpolates the animation. Let's go ahead and bring that back. So if I right click on this again, I can change my handle type to say free. And if I do that, now I could move just this one handle. And this is not really showing a lot of change, but if we were to play this now, we'll see that it goes up even higher. So it goes up and then it goes up higher. Okay, so I'm going to Control Z to undo that. The main thing I want to show you is this. So I'm going to spread this out. So what we have right now is we have a really nice eased animation. So this animation starts off kind of slow, speeds up, and then slows down at the end. And kind of the same thing on the other side. Only problem is that's not really how balls bounce. So if I were to click this one to select it, right click on it, and then I'm going to come down to interpolation mode. Then we have what's called easy. Okay, actually, let's look at these first. First off, under the interpolation mode, we have constant. Notice how that changed. So what's going to happen is my ball, or my cube there, is going to stay on the z-axis until it gets here. Then it's going to instantly jump to the next one. Let's go ahead and look at another. So interpolation mode linear. Linear is just a straight line, constant speed, start to finish. Animations that use linear tend to look very robotic. We're going to go into interpolation mode, and then we'll do the Bezier. So that's our default to Bezier. But if I right click on it again, we can go to the easing, and we can say ease in. So that's kind of what it's doing anyway, and that's not really what we want. So I'm going to say easing, and we'll say ease out. And again, didn't really give me what I want, so I'm going to do it manually. Sometimes Blender is just kind of frustrating. Well, first off, I need to change the type. So Control Z to undo what I did. I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to change my handle type to free. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to do this with it. So now it's going to go very, very quickly and then kind of ease off at the end. So let's go back to the beginning, hit spacebar. All right, I kind of like the way that looked. Spacebar. So now I'm going to do the opposite to this one. I'm going to go ahead and grab that, right click on it, handle type free. I'm going to drag this handle up so that it kind of looks like that. Grab this guy. All right. Go back to 0, hit spacebar. All right. So by playing with our easing, we can end up with some very interesting effects on our animation. To learn more, go to Copilot and ask about the curve editor. Okay. Now I'd like to wrap this up by showing one more thing that we can animate. We're going to animate the texture on our object. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this. Very quickly, we're going to jump over to the Shading tab. I'm going to select the cube and create a new material on it. Now I'm going to bring in a couple of other materials as well, so we'll leave that one there. I'm going to press Shift-A to add, and I'm going to type in EM, so an emission shader. An emission shader is the one that creates light. So I'm going to make the light change color, or I'm going to make the cube light up when it hits the ground, I think is what my plan is. All right, one more that we need to add here into our shading editor, Shift-A, and I'm going to type the word mix, M-I-X, and we're going to look for a mix shader. A mix shader is going to allow me to take these two shaders and apply it to this object. The factor determines which color is going to show. So we're going to go ahead and make the material just a bright red to begin with. And on the shader, the emission shader, we're going to go ahead and make it bright green. And we'll set it for something like 5, so it's really bright. All right. What we want to do now is I'm going to make myself a new timeline. So we're going to go horizontal split and timeline. This way I can play. So first things first, let's select the mix shader, and I am going to hit I while hovering over it. Okay, that has created a keyframe. And if I look at my summary, I'll see I now have a new rollout, material 001, shader no tree, default value mix shader. Let's go ahead and scrub the playhead out to where it lands on the ground. I'm going to look at it from the side so I can get it exactly where I want it to be. Like that, be that one right there. All right, again, I'm going to hover my mouse over the mix shader value, and I'm going to press I. And actually I lied, I'm going to do that, then I'm going to hit I. There we go, much better. All right, fingers crossed. Well, it sure changed a lot sooner than I expected it to. That's okay. I'm going to fix this. Actually, yes, I did it wrong. So, I mean, I did it right, but I need to go finish it. So, what I've got going on now is it's interpolating between those two colors. Unfortunately, I don't want it to change color until I get to 120. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back to my layout where I have my curve editor open. I'm going to select this. Let's go ahead and hide everybody else. And then here is my value for that. And as we scrub through this, we can see it starts to, and we'll do this, we can see that it starts to change right about there. It really does. So I'm going to select this keyframe here. I'm going to right click next to it and we'll say interpolation type and we'll say constant. So now that's going to stay red until it hits the ground, and then it's going to turn green. Let's go back to layout. We're already in layout. Let's get a nice camera view here. I'm going to change my curve editor back to my timeline. Now I can scrub my playhead around. Okay. Now let's find a decent viewport. Shift A to add a camera. Control Shift 0 is going to Control Alt 0? Control Alt 0 is going to place that camera at your viewport. So if I scrub my playhead now, we can see. Okay. Let's put a couple materials on here just for giggles. So we'll go to shading. Let's create a material for this object. And I'm just going to change the color, make it kind of a brown. And then for the world, I'm going to go to my world options and I'm going to set this to pure black. So let's go ahead and bring in a light now. So Shift A, light, and we'll do an area light. This is my zoom. GZ, let's bring that up. I'm going to go over to my light settings. When you bring them in, by default, they're 10 watts, which is not very bright. That don't look bad. GZ, we'll bring it up a little bit more. Maybe kick this up to about 600 watts. And then generally, you don't want to leave it with just one, so Shift D to copy that. Let's bring it over here. Shift D again. Shift Z so I don't move it. And then we're really not going to see it from the back, so I'm just going to kind of put this one over there. Right there. Okay. Now, you can light your scene however you like, but I really like the CSI lighting. And so we're going to put kind of a reddish light in the back. And kind of a blue light towards the front. And let's look through the camera, just can see how that looks. Okay. To really get the most out of this, I'm going to use cycles. So I switch over to cycles. I'm going to set my max samples on the render to 120. Before I go any further, I'm going to go to my output. I want to make sure that we're not putting that in the temp folder. We want to change the type from PNG to FFmpeg video. Under encoding, we want to go ahead and set MPEG 4. And let's go ahead and render this animation. Oops. I think I probably need to change a few things real quick. Let's just double check. System CUDA. Okay, it'll take quite that long. As much as I would like to do this in cycles, I think I'm going to go ahead and do it in Eevee just because it'll be faster. Speed is important today. So, all right, let's do this thing. All right, we covered quite a bit in this lecture. You might have to watch it more than once. Animation is a skill that takes a very long time to cultivate. But it's well worth the effort. And I look forward to seeing what you all create. All right, we are just about done rendering. We will go and look at this video as soon as it is done. All done, and then here is the actual video. All right, if you have any questions, be sure and reach out to me. I look forward